looking at global economic growth, some of the fastest growing economies are actually in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. So if we look at all emerging economies, they are growing at about 6.6%, but 12 African economies are expected to grow close to or faster than the forecasted average of 6.6 per annum for all emerging and developing economies. So there are some real growth, fast-growing countries. Ethiopia, for example, this is the IMF research. Other research indicates that Ethiopia, for example, is going to grow by more than 10%. There are a number of countries in Africa that will grow at a steady pace, albeit from a lower base, but a steady pace of healthy single digits to double digits. So those are the expected growth numbers in the next 5 years. Clearly, there are Asian countries such as China and India where growth rates are greater than the Asian average, and are high. But if we're looking at this in terms of all factors, the focus becomes choosing the pockets of growth that are sustainable and are driven by favorable demographics and the potential for impact. Because after all, this is a conference where we are talking about financial returns, but also quantifiable social and environmental impact. So Africa is poised for tremendous economic growth. So one is based on demographics and just the numbers that are substantiating growth. And the second thing I think we need to look at is climate change. I think it's quite ironic that the continent with the lowest emissions stands to lose the most. And this map to me is quite a frightening map because this is a comparison. If you look at the red map on the bottom, that's the regional distribution of 4 climate-sensitive health consequences if the world temperature increases by 2 degrees centigrade. And what we are seeing right now is clearly extremes. Hot places are getting hotter, cold places are getting colder, and the red is basically the impact of climate change on the continent of Africa. And you can see Africa is actually standing to lose the most as a result of climate change. So wherever there is chaos, I think there's opportunity. And after a long career in investment banking, I kept asking the question, what are the consumer-led growth industries, that are at the core of poverty alleviation? And we concluded there were at least 3. One, telecommunications. And this was really in the African context. I think it applies to other geographies as well. But telecommunications as a driver of knowledge based on activities. The mobile phone market has come as a surprise to everybody in the African context. If you look at the large providers like Vodafone, for example, they all underestimated what would happen in Africa. And the mobile phone market has seen a cumulative growth of 50%. And if you talk to people like Dr. Mo Ibrahim, who founded Celtel, it's really, really amazing what a tremendous growth story and success story that really is. And that is going to continue. But this is a classic leapfrogging of technology. We've spent quite a bit of time this morning talking about the grid and the limitations of the grid. But in the African context, where you really don't have a grid and you don't have landlines, certainly in telephony, we have seen a complete leapfrogging. Nobody is really dependent on landlines for all practical purposes. You know, you go to rural Malawi and people have mobile phones. You know, they may not have a way to plug them in, to charge them, but they have mobile phones. So, so these three sectors that I'm touching on here are really mutually reinforcing. Telecommunications, energy, and finance. And with the renewable energy, we see a parallel between what is happening with telecommunications and what can happen with clean energy. There is clear statistical evidence that there is a correlation between energy consumption and GDP. Energy is at the core of growth. So the question in the African context is how do we increase this energy consumption? And we believe that renewable and clean energy is going to play a significant role in filling that gap, and both in terms of on and off-grid solutions. And I'm happy to talk in more detail about that. And then thirdly, SME finance. This is key to tackling poverty and fostering entrepreneurship, because what we are seeing and we were just talking, I was talking with a couple of people earlier, what we are seeing in so many developing environments is that there's quite a bit of money now flowing into the microfinance space. And thanks to people like Dr. Mohamed Yunus and others, microfinance is growing. Almost too much money is flowing into microfinance if you look at the Indian experience, for example. If you're at the upper end, there is no problem for you to get banked, but where the gap is, it's in the middle. It's in the SME space, and we're calling it the missing middle. It is a real gap there, and the traditional banks are not prepared to fill this gap. Even if they are going lower down the food chain, and the microfinance institutions are generally not able to fill the gap either, because what I'm seeing in practice is the clients who are actually successful, who do need more services, a portfolio of products, they generally don't get them from the microfinance institutions. So these are key sectors for growth and impact, because, as I said a moment ago, these sectors are mutually reinforcing. In addition, if you look at Africa, one of the questions that everybody is asking is, what about corruption? What about rule of law? And to us, we look at countries in Africa on a case-by-case basis, even regions, and that are quite nuanced. And we are generally asking two questions. One is there rule of law? In other words, is the contract that you are entering into worth the paper it's written on? And secondly, is there freedom of the press? And those two are normally very good indicators whether this is an environment that is conducive to doing business. And certainly if you look at Africa now, particularly Southern Africa, a number of the countries are free and have rule of law, have a reasonable freedom of the press. Unfortunately, if you listen to the CNN views, the focus obviously is on the trouble spots. It's on Zimbabwe. It's other trouble spots, and generally the news are ignoring the incredible progress that has been made in countries like Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, Rwanda, Tanzania, Kenya, Ghana, etc. So there is so much positive momentum in this area of democratic countries with good rule of law, generally based on English common law, so you get decent legal enforcement and a reasonable amount of transparency. And just to say a word about corruption, There is I can't tell you how many times I have been asked the question, well, how do you deal with corruption? And my